Hello and welcome to everyone across the nation joining today's workshop on how to manage testing sessions. This workshop focuses on managing multiple testing sessions simultaneously to deliver CASAS web-based tests to any type of student, new, current, and returning, using different test series, form levels, and modalities. It's quite a feat, and try to do likewise with paper-based testing, and that would be quite challenging. So using CASAS eTest Online affords you that flexibility. A certified proctor is authorized to perform the steps that we will be discussing today in today's workshop, and they will perform these steps in combination with administering tests. The second workshop following today is on administering tests, so these workshops actually go hand in hand. Folks, this is one of 23 complementary CASAS Online implementation workshops. Now, you are not expected to attend all 23 workshops as indicated by the Citrix Online system, if you may have received a reminder from them. This is simply a training room set up to conduct all 23 workshops. We do highly recommend attending as many as possible to learn about best practices, ask questions, and to become confident in using the online system. Online help documentation is available on our website under Training and Support. eTests help documentation, we commonly refer to that as ET or simply eTests. And then TE, for TOPS Pro Enterprise Help Documentation. There's a wealth of information contained in both of these areas. You will want to be sure and bookmark these as your electronic go-to resources, particularly the CASAS eTest Online Guide, which provides the information covered in these workshops. Today's workshop will cover information in Section 4 of the CASAS eTest Online Guide that includes guidelines and a step-by-step tutorial. Let me go ahead and increase this for your viewing preference here. Before we get started, I would like to point out where you will find access to CASAS eTest Online and TOPS Pro Enterprise Online. So up here in the upper left corner of your screen, the HTTPS, the S is for a secure website, and the main domain name is etestsonline.org. This is the main domain name for accessing TOPS Pro Enterprise, the data management application, as well as anything that has to do with CASAS eTest Online. This web address is commonly referred to as the production server. In other words, this is where you will be producing live data. Now for today's workshop, we will be using a simulation server known as Rolling Hills Adult School. This is a fictional database that refreshes nightly. This is available to anyone wanting to experiment and explore our online system without risk of compromising live data. You will find information on how to access the simulation server from eTest help documentation under the Getting Started topic. We have quite a lot of information here on getting started, and if you are at this point, folks, this would be your starting point here. Several documents available here, including the simulation server document, and additional links on how to implement CASAS eTest Online, the overview, and then getting started. You may want to print a list or this going live checklist so that you can see where you are in the process prior to going live. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to the simulation server. And actually before that, I'm going to go directly to Section 4 here. And as mentioned a moment ago, that It is a certified proctor who will perform these steps. So we have a section simply titled Proctored Duties. You may want to break out this section from the guide and provide this to anyone at your agency who will serve in a proctor role for using CASAS Test Online. Proctors do have to complete certification in order to administer CASAS Test Online. All proctors must do their part to maintain a controlled testing environment that will allow test takers to perform to the very best of their abilities. Now, proctors should follow the same procedures before, during, and after conducting testing sessions. Following these procedures will assure the validity of test results and reduce the likelihood of confusion and error during testing. The two primary duties, or excuse me, I'll say CASAS identified two primary duties of a certified proctor. Now I know there are three listed here, but the two primary duties, folks, are managing sessions and administering tests. A certified coordinator is not granted the rights to manage sessions and administering tests. If an individual serving in the coordinator role will also proctor assessments. Well, and in fact, we actually recommend that anyone taking on the role of a coordinator also complete proctor certification so that they understand firsthand what is expected of the proctors for whom they supervise in administering CASAS web-based assessments. So if a certified coordinator is also certified as a proctor, then of course the certified coordinator / proctor can also manage sessions and administer tests. Okay. Let's see, let's go ahead and pop over to the next page here. Now, managing web-based testing involves starting and stopping pre-configured testing sessions. Yesterday we held a workshop on creating sessions. Now, I know that was a whirlwind of a workshop, went rather quickly, and your heads, I'm sure, were probably spinning. There is quite a lot of thought that goes into creating those sessions, and we have come up with a standard configuration for your assurance of adherence to test security, or test security, test administration, and to align with your state or organization's assessment policy. So we are offering to create sessions for you to meet your assessment needs. And so a session or group of sessions must be present in CASAS Test Online prior to proctors fulfilling their duties of managing sessions and administering tests. So essentially a proctor will start and stop testing sessions, manage those sessions throughout the duration of administering tests. Now, starting a testing session is similar to handing out test booklets in a paper-based world. With paper-based testing, proctors sign in, and I'll just go over here to the Rolling Hills Adult School Simulation server. Proctors actually sign in to the management console to start a session before tests can be administered. So I'm going to actually change this from coordinator to proctor and log in. This is one of many test security features built into the online system. When a proctor signs on to the management console, he or she may find testing sessions in various states. For example, all of these sessions here that are displayed are currently, they are all inactive. So essentially they're all available to use. When proctors sign on, if you are an organization that has multiple site locations and or multiple types of programs, you may want to train your proctors to first off select the site location at which they are assigned to proctors, so that minimizes the list, as well as sorting for, say, actually here, I'll go over here on the template, say for the program. in which they are assigned to Proctor. Now, folks, you can administer tests to any type of student, as I mentioned early on in this workshop, any type of student, not only new, current, and returning, but also students across instructional programs, say both ABE and ESL alike. But I'm just giving this as an example, as a way to help minimize this list so it's not so intimidating and also leaves less room for error in proctors inadvertently starting sessions that perhaps are not even at their site or not for the appropriate program. Okay. Now essentially sessions should remain in the inactive state. In other words, the session is not yet started or has been stopped. Now, once we start sessions, the status will turn to active, and so that the Proctor then has activated testing to begin testing on testing stations once the station is prepared. You may also see in the status column suspended, and that would mean that a session is suspended due to the Proctor's supervisory hours ending, or the session was not stopped by a Proctor. Now, after starting a session, the Proctor then can initiate testing on a registered station. And actually, let me go ahead and come back over here and simply start this testing session as an example. When proctors start a session, their name is displayed, and the proctor is to acknowledge their responsibilities and duties as they are supervising test administration, and they are required to be present throughout the duration of testing. The proctors should also be mindful of selecting the maximum supervisory hours for which they are assigned to proctor. And folks, this the default is 8 hours. You can minimize this to, say, 4 hours or even 3 hours. That's up to you. If you are administering, say, 2 modalities per sitting, then you would want to go at least 3 hours when you consider an hour per modality. And if it's a new student intake, then you have an additional 15 minutes per modality for the locator or 30 minutes for an appraisal. If you are using an appraisal plus pretest, then you will want to go to, say, a 4-hour time period or block of time. Now, the session, let's say we select 4 hours. If the proctor forgets to stop this session, then as a safeguard and test security measure, the application will automatically suspend the session after 4 hours. Okay. Now, you may operate assessment labs or have a computer lab that's literally open throughout an entire day. A proctor can, in fact, start a session in the morning and be present throughout the entire day for administering assessments. Now, there are additional options which we're going to go into in just a moment for managing the session, such as extending time, taking over sessions, continuing a session, and or adding additional time for that session. Okay. Once the proctor starts the session, the proctor then would add an appropriate testing station to that active session. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so I'm going to back up for just a moment and return back to the guide to emphasize that after starting a session, that's when the proctor then transitions to going to the registered testing stations to initiate testing at the station. Now, a common mistake first-time online proctors make is attempting to administer a test before starting the session. So as an example, I've gone ahead and initiated testing on a station, And this is what the screen looks like on a station that is registered. And as a safeguard, the refresh button is in place of a student ID input field. And this is to prevent someone launching into a test in a non-proctored environment. Okay, so no matter how many times someone clicks refresh, this will not open up to deliver a test until the proctor officially starts a session and adds the station to that active session. Okay, now we are going to change this statement to make it a little bit more descriptive to leave less room for misunderstanding. And so specifically, I've requested for this to be changed to please wait for Proctor to start the testing session or add your station to an active session. So as you saw a moment ago, I started the testing session. The session is active. And if I went to initiate testing on a testing station, let's go to the simulation server here. And we're going to cover administering tests or initiating testing from the testing station in the next session, but the proctor would click Administer Test on any registered testing station, clicking Administer Test and then run the executable file. That prepares the registered testing station for test delivery. But prior to that, the proctor must sign in to the management console to officially start a specific testing session or multiple testing sessions. Okay, so that brings us to this this part right here. Okay, and so the proctor may become a little bit confused momentarily when they know that they have signed on, they've started a session, go to the station, click Administer Test, and receive this screen and not understand why this will not open up to administer a test. So what the proctor may not be realizing at that moment is that they need to add the station. They need to identify the particular station at which they have seated a student, add that to the active session. So that way, at the testing station, when the refresh button is clicked, that now opens up into an ID input field. This is one of several areas of test security that is built into the online system. Now, stopping sessions is equally important and is similar to collecting test booklets when finished with testing. Again, first-time online proctors tend to forget that they must stop sessions. Proctors are more likely, relieved that they remembered to sign on and start a session, go to the station and administer tests, and in their mind, they've done their job. But they must return to the management console, to the session activity window, and click the Manage button to officially stop the session. They can also click the Manage button from the list of testing sessions. Now notice, because we have this session, it was started, the session list, testing sessions list, shows the signed on proctor and shows that the session is active. These next few pages go through the step-by-step tutorial on signing on to the management console, going to testing sessions, and starting the appropriate testing session. Proctors can also filter for specified sessions, sites, or locations, specifying the amount of supervisory hours, and starting the session, adding appropriate stations by selecting them and clicking Add. And now they have added the stations to an active session, so now the students can begin test administration. Now we're not going to go into the intervene, or that is a feature that we will go into tomorrow on interrupting tests and reconnecting suspended tests, and that falls under the category of interrupting tests in progress. But where I want to get here is follow directions for administering tests. So as long as the proctor has signed on to the management console, started their testing session, added appropriate stations, has gone to the stations themselves, clicked Administer Test to run the executable file, then they will receive the student ID input field and students can begin testing. Now I want to jump down to page 66 here to emphasize some very important points. As you saw in the list of testing sessions, that there are a template family of sessions per instructional program per site location. So each site must have its own program set of sessions. In addition, if you have multiple lab locations within the same site, then you will need to add the name of the lab within the session description so that proctors are sure to only select sessions available to their lab in the site locations, as well as only selecting registered stations in the lab for which they are assigned a proctor. So to emphasize, a testing session or testing sessions are created for each testing room where stations are registered. Testing sessions are created for use at each site as well. Each testing room must have its own proctor present and signed on to the management console to ensure that appropriate procedures are followed in each room. So it is the signed on proctor who must sign in, or it's the proctor present in each room, excuse me, who must sign in to CASAS eTest Online and start the sessions that are available to them in their room. It is not appropriate for proctors to start sessions at other site locations or for a proctor to start sessions in other physical rooms, other room locations within the same site. There are logs kept to track the activity per proctor, and it is vitally important, folks, to know who the signed-on proctor is, who is also present in the testing room, so that when any report of testing irregularity is submitted to CASAS, then we have a point of reference to look at the tremendous amount of logs that are generated daily, but it helps our development team to pinpoint anomalies that may occur during testing. Each testing room must only use stations registered in the same room. So here again, among these testing sessions, not only should the signed-on proctor who is physically present in the room or the lab at the site location should only use stations registered to that room. It's not appropriate for a proctor who is physically present in one room to select stations, registered stations that are in other rooms or perhaps other offices, so that students can test, hopefully not within a non-proctored environment, but I think you get my point, okay? So each proctor in a testing room is responsible for using stations in the room, and it is not appropriate for proctors to use stations from other testing rooms, okay? The proctor who starts a session is the one who adds stations to the session activity window if stations are not already pre-assigned to the session, and only selects stations that are registered to their room. As demonstrated, this will activate computers for testing. As you saw a moment ago, before I added the station to this active session, there was a refresh button here. Even though the testing station was activated and prepared for testing, it's not until the proctor starts the session and activates the station, from the session activity window that the testing station becomes activated as well to begin test administration. Now, if testing sessions are scheduled closely throughout the day, then the session can remain active provided a proctor remains in the testing room at all times. Okay, so let's say that you've conducted an intake session and you have a short 30-minute break, and now you're going to have students coming in for another intake session, or whatever the case may be. As a security measure, the proctor should manage the session, click Manage, and suspend the session. What that does, folks, is that closes access at the testing station. So here you saw that I activated this station for that session, and if I attempted to enter my ID, if I happen to wander in the room in a non-proctored environment and enter an ID in a session that has been suspended, then the individual will receive this message: the test session is suspended. Okay, so you can take breaks with the assurance that test security is adhered to. Okay, and that's a benefit rather than completely stopping a session, because if this session were stopped, the proctor would have to restart the session and add stations again to the session. So here again, if sessions are scheduled closely together, then use the suspend button to then, without stopping the session, so that you can take a short break and return. And then once you return, simply click the Manage button and continue that session. Okay, continuing that session will reactivate the station, and now we're ready for testing again. One other demonstration before our time is up. Is, let's see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and actually log out as Proctor 33 and say sign in as Proctor 3. Let's say that you have ongoing testing and you have someone proctoring for, say, the first 2, 3, or 4 hours. You have testing still occurring, and students are still in various states of testing. Then and let's say that Proctor 33 needs to leave for any reason, or perhaps that's all the time they were scheduled, but a second proctor now is coming in to take over their shift, so to speak. So that second proctor would sign in so that the proctor who initially started the session, rather than, well, in fact, they cannot stop. They cannot manage the session and stop it if students are actively testing. And you will see if students are actively testing from the session activity window, their name and the status of their testing and the form number and so forth. All of this information will be populated here if testing is still occurring on any stations that are associated with this active session. So the session cannot be stopped. And so at this point, this proctor would simply sign out. The new proctor coming on board would sign in. They would click the Manage button and take over that session. Now, they may also need to extend time. So I would say, they should select the appropriate amount of time for taking over that session. And now notice the signed on proctor. Let's see, it doesn't Proctor 3 now. The supervisory, as well as it displays here, is that now there's been a change of proctors. And this also gets logged for tracking purposes. Okay, folks, that just about does it for today's workshop. There is more information in this section that we will cover in tomorrow's session, as well as we do have another session in a half an hour on administering tests. So we'll begin to put things together. I'll show you the combination of managing sessions combined with administering assessments. But I just simply want to end this particular session with testing guidelines, such as when the proctor is receiving test takers into the testing room, that it's recommended to alternate test type between reading, listening, and math, between students seated next to each other. This reduces the likelihood of sharing answers and viewing, perhaps viewing the same testing screens or the same screens, or the screens that perhaps by coincidence may have the same exact test items. Let's say you have two brand new students coming in, you sit them next to each other, you start them both on a reading locator, and they both happen to be presented with a Form 81R Level A reading test. Okay, you will notice, and I've experienced this myself, that the students then will tend to go through the same test in synchronous fashion, test items in synchronous fashion. And so if you notice that, if you observe that, you can always interrupt administration of that test for one of the students and direct them to a different station so that the students are not seated next to each other. And that's easily done through the management console here. And we will, by simply removing the station and redirecting this administration to another station. Okay. Encourage students to use the full recommended time per test and test type, such as locators are timed for 15 minutes, pre and post assessments or leveled forms are timed for a standard 60 minutes. Please take note that listening tests do auto-advance on the protected test content. The listening tests do not auto-advance on practice test items. So before administering a listening test for the first time to a student, we highly recommend allowing that student to take one of the listening practice tests. It's just quick, I believe it's 9 test items. I would use the lowest level practice or listening practice test and have that student take that just so that they understand the auto-advancing before they launch into the actual test. Now, folks, when the test timer expires, whether they're taking a locator or an appraisal or a pre or post assessment, the application will close, score, and record the test, even if the student did not complete the entire test. Students are presented with pop-up messages at 10 minutes and also 1 minute before the test timer is actually due to expire. So letting them know when their test is to finish. And as always, folks, please take note of the CASAS Technology Support Team email address. So use this to inquire with any one of us at CASAS with regards to using CASAS eTests Online and TOPS Pro Enterprise Online. This is your go-to, not only the help documentation is your go-to electronic resource, the tech support at CASAS.org is your go-to email address to get the support you need. Okay, I've kept you over time. Are there any questions before we close this workshop, take a brief break, and resume in less than 30 minutes for Administering Tests workshop? Okay, Jennifer, how do students receive their ID numbers? Excellent question. IDs are assigned by the local agency or organization. We do have on our development task list for agencies who would like the option of our online system auto-assigning IDs. I don't have an estimated time frame or delivery of that option. So in the meantime, we recommend that if you do not have a third-party registration and or attendance system, particularly a registration system, that assigns a unique ID per student, then you may want to consider coming up with a standard method for assigning IDs, such as you can use the, and I'm going to type this into the chat box here. If you take note, today is March 18th, 2015. Let's say that my birth date is March 18th, 1980, for example. You could use the convention of, okay, now I entered this in the chat box, of a social security number, such as using the first 3 digits to represent the month someone is born. Use the second 2 digits to represent the day someone was born. And of course, if it's a single-digit day, then you would add a preceding 0. And then add the year at the end. Now you may say, well, what if someone has the exact same birth date? No problem. Then use shorten up, then have 00318, you would have 8001. So this would represent a duplicate student. So there's one student who has an identical birth date to this other student here, and so forth. That's one suggestion. The ID input field will accept alpha characters as well as symbols, dashes, spaces, periods, and so forth. You can use a combination of alphanumeric characters as well for assigning IDs. The most important thing to remember, though, is whatever ID you issue to that student, that is the same exact ID that they should use from that point forward for any type of testing, so that you have the assurance that that student will always be presented with the next appropriate test based on that student's prior test history. If you have proctors who allow students to sign in with any ID when they're progress testing, that student will be seen by the system as a brand new student and therefore repeat the testing process, and chances are they'll repeat the same test that they last took. Okay, so the IDs must be unique per student, and that student must use the same ID from that point forward. Now that doesn't mean you can't change the ID. If you change the ID, which is done through the TOPS Pro Enterprise Online, that's fine, just let the student know. Okay, and proctors can always cross-reference student IDs from the student's menu in the Application Management Console. Here's students here, and this will list students in the database. There's an advanced filtering option that they can filter for students to find out what the ID is assigned to them. Okay? All right, good question, Jennifer. Thank you. Any other questions, folks, before we end this workshop? Alrighty then, well, thank you so much for your participation, and I look forward to seeing you back in about 20 minutes for the Administering Tests workshop. That will help you to mentally put these two processes together, managing sessions combined with administering tests. Okay, thank you for your time, and we'll see you in a short bit.